biological contribution to the
Good
onset of malignant
evening,
disease.
or afternoon,
Through the
Earth.
interconnection
This is Adam Sturch
linking the
broadcasting from the
components of
Mushroom
body's
Mansion House,
stress
New Mexico,
apparatus,
working on
the
oil
nerves,
painting
the hormonal glands,
warmth.
the immune system,
Now
and the
titled.
brain centers where emotions
Alright, today I'm just
perceived
going to block
and
in some real
processed.
simple colors to lay out a
Biologic
foundation
and
to start developing some
psychological
detail.
activity are not
I've
independent.
got some
Each represents the
couple of
functioning
flesh
a
tones,
supersystem
a madder
whose
carmine, a
components can no
alizarin
longer be
crimson,
thought of as
and
separate or
deep,
autonomous mechanisms.
what was it, sienna or umber?
The past
Something deep,
quarter-century of scientific inquiry
for sort of a
has supplanted the
maroonish
traditional
blanket
Western medical view
tone
of a split
in a
between
glaze,
body and mind,
then some yellow
with a truer,
cadmium
more
just to go
unitary
around and start
perspective.
hitting the light source
Candace Pert,
surfaces,
a leading
light
American
sourced
researcher,
surfaces,
has
and then an
written that
orange for the upper
the
left
conceptual
picture that's
division
above the
between
couch.
sciences of immunology,
What else?
endocrinology, and
So we'll start with that
psychology
and see where we go.
neuroscience is a historical artifact. Psychoneuroimmunology, or more comprehensively and accurately, psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology, is the name of the discipline that studies the interrelated functions of the organs and glands that regulate our behavior and physiological balance. The brain, nervous system, immune organs and immune cells, and the endocrine glands are joined together through several pathways. As more research is done, more links are likely to be discovered. The combined task of this psychoneuroimmunoendocrine (PNI) system is to ensure the development, survival, and reproduction of each organism. The acronym PNI more commonly refers to the science of psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. For convenience reasons, I use it here to describe the physiological system that science studies. It is tedious for both writer and reader to keep spelling out the word psychoneuroimmunoendocrine. The interconnections among the components of the PNI system enable it to recognize potential threats from within or without, and to respond with behaviors and biochemical changes coordinated to maximize safety at minimal cost. The various parts of the PNI supersystem are wired together by nervous system connections, some of them only recently identified. For example, the immune centers, previously thought of as acted on only by hormones, are extensively supplied with nerves. The so-called primary immune organs are the bone marrow and the thymus gland, located in the upper chest in front of the heart. Immune cells maturing in the bone marrow or in the thymus travel to the secondary lymph organs, including the spleen and the lymph glands. Fibers issuing from the central nervous system supply both primary and secondary lymph organs, allowing instant communication from the brain to the immune system. The hormone-producing endocrine glands are also directly wired to the central nervous system. Thus, the brain can talk directly to the thyroid and adrenal glands, or to the testes and ovaries and other organs. In turn, the hormones from the endocrine glands and substances produced by the immune cells directly affect brain activity. Chemicals from all these sources attach to receptors on the surfaces of brain cells, thereby influencing the organism's behavior. We have all had the experience described in medical language as sickness behavior, which illustrates the action of immune products on the brain. A group of chemicals called cytokines, secreted by immune cells, can induce the feelings that prompt us to call in sick to our workplace: fever, loss of appetite, fatigue, and increased need for sleep. Distressing as they are, such rapid adaptations are designed to conserve energy, helping us to overcome illness. Inappropriate secretion of the same substances, however, would interfere with normal functioning, for example, by causing excessive fatigue or chronic fatigue. It is astonishing to learn that lymph cells and other white blood cells are capable of manufacturing nearly all the hormones and messenger substances produced in the brain and nervous system. Even endorphins, the body's intrinsic morphine-like mood-altering chemicals and painkillers, can be secreted by lymphocytes. And these immune cells also have on their surfaces receptors for the hormones and other molecules originating in the brain. In short, In addition to the unifying network of nerve fibers that wire together the various components of the PNI supersystem, there is also constant biochemical crosstalk among them. The myriad products they can each send to or receive from the others enable them all to speak and understand the same molecular language and to respond, each in its own way, to the same signals. The PNI system is like a giant switchboard, always alight with coordinated messages coming in from all directions and going out to all directions at the same time. It follows, too, that whatever short-term or chronic stimulus acts on any one part of the PNI system, it has the potential to affect the other parts as well. What makes possible the versatile, interactive functions of the PNI system? A microscopic look would reveal numerous receptor sites on the surface of each cell to which the common molecular messengers can bind. As Candace Pert reports, a typical nerve cell, or neuron, may have millions of receptors on its surface. If you were to assign a different color to each of the receptors that scientists have identified, the average cell surface would appear as a multicolored mosaic of at least 70 different hues, 50,000 of one type of receptor, 10,000 of another, 100,000 of a third, and so forth. The messenger molecules and most of the hormones are made of amino acids, the basic building blocks of protein. They are called peptides, the technical name for longer chains of amino acids. None of these chemicals are restricted to any one area or organ of the body. An eminent neuroscientist has suggested the term information substances to describe the entire group because they each carry information from one cell or one organ to another. There are multiple potential interactions between information substances emanating from each part of the PNI system and cell types in each other part. The hub of the PNI system is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal nexus, the HPA axis. It is through the activation of the HPA axis that both psychological and physical stimuli set in motion the body's responses to threat. Psychological stimuli are first evaluated in the emotional centers known as the limbic system, which includes parts of the cerebral cortex and also deeper brain structures. If the brain interprets the incoming information as threatening, the hypothalamus will induce the pituitary to secrete an adrenocorticotropic hormone. ACTH, in turn, causes the cortex of the adrenal gland to secrete cortisol into the circulation. Simultaneously with this hormonal cascade, the hypothalamus sends messages via the sympathetic nervous system, the flight or fight part of the nervous system, to another part of the adrenal, the medulla. The adrenal medulla manufactures and secretes the flight-fight hormone adrenaline, which immediately stimulates the cardiovascular and nervous systems. The same influences that the organism is most likely to interpret as emotionally stressful are, not surprisingly, also the most powerful psychic triggers for the HPA axis. Psychological factors such as uncertainty, conflict, lack of control, and lack of information are considered the most stressful stimuli and strongly activate the HPA axis. Sense of control and consummatory behavior result in immediate suppression of HPA activity. Consummatory behavior, from the Latin consumare, to complete, is behavior that removes the danger or relieves the tension caused by it. We recall that stress-inducing stimuli are not always objective external threats like predators or potential physical disasters, but also include internal perceptions that something that we consider essential is lacking. This is why lack of control, lack of information, and, as we will see, unsatisfied emotional needs, for example, lack of love, trigger the HPA axis. Consummation of such needs abolishes the stress response. Given the biochemical and neurological cross-influences within the PNI system, we can readily understand how emotions are able to interact with hormones, immune defenses, and the nervous system. In cancer causation, disturbed hormonal activity and impaired immune defenses both play a role. Lung cancer is a prime example. The mechanistic view holds that cancer results from damage to the DNA of a cell by some noxious substance, for example, tobacco breakdown products. This perspective is valid as far as it goes, but cannot explain why some smokers develop cancers while others do not, even if the amount and type of tobacco they inhale are exactly the same. The unanswered questions are, why are the cells of some individuals more susceptible than those of others? Why does DNA repair occur in some people but not in others? Why do the immune system and other defenses keep cancer at bay in some people but not in others? What accounts for vast differences in cure or disease progression from one person to the next, even when the identical cancer is diagnosed at exactly the same stage, and even when all other factors, age, gender, income, general health, are exactly matched? Genetic variations may explain these issues in some cancers, although, as we have seen with breast cancer, in the majority of people, heredity does not play a role in cancer causation. Lung cancer, specifically, is not a genetically transmitted disease, nor is the damage to genes in lung cancer due to heredity. The development of any malignancy progresses through several stages, the first of which is initiation, the process by which a normal cell becomes transformed into an abnormal one. Cancer may be seen as a disease of cell replication. The normal processes of cell division and cell death are somehow subverted. A cell that should give rise to healthy offspring escapes from control and divides into malformed facsimiles that replicate themselves without regard to the biological needs of the organism. With millions of cells dying or being formed in the body every day, natural accident would, by itself, lead to a great number of spontaneous, abnormal transformations. It's a fact that every one of us has a number of tiny cancerous tumors growing in our bodies at every moment, writes Candace Pert. Tobacco smoke has a directly damaging effect on the genetic material of lung cells. It has been estimated that for the initiation of cancer, lung cells have to acquire as many as 10 separate lesions or points of damage on their DNA. Yet, no matter where in the body, such genomic damage seldom leads to tumor formation. This is principally due to the fact that most primary lesions are transient and are readily eliminated by DNA repair or cell death. In other words, DNA repairs itself, or the cell dies without replicating its damaged genetic material, which, no doubt, accounts for the fact that most smokers do not develop clinical lung cancer. When cancer does arise, either DNA repair or the normal process of cell death must have failed. In a 1999 review of psychological effects on lung cancer, researchers from the Ohio State University College of Medicine wrote, "Faulty DNA repair is associated with an increased incidence of cancer. Stress may alter these DNA repair mechanisms. For example, in one study, lymphocytes from psychiatric inpatients with higher depressive symptoms demonstrated impairment in their ability to repair cellular DNA damaged by exposure to X-irradiation, X-rays. Impaired DNA repair has also been documented in studies of stressed laboratory animals. Apoptosis is the scientific term for the physiologically regulated death necessary for the maintenance of healthy tissues. Apoptosis ensures normal tissue turnover, culling older cells with weakened genetic material, leaving room for their healthy and vigorous offspring. Dysregulated apoptosis contributes to many pathologies, including tumor production, autoimmune and immunodeficiency diseases, and neurodegenerative disorders. Steroid hormones released through the activity of the HPA axis help regulate apoptosis in a number of ways. Habitual repression of emotion leaves a person in a situation of chronic stress, and chronic stress creates an unnatural biochemical milieu in the body. Perpetually abnormal steroid hormone levels can interfere with normal programmed cell death. Also participating in cell death are natural killer cells. Depression, a mental state in which repression of anger dominates emotional functioning, interacts with cigarette smoking to lower the activity of NK cells. In short, for cancer causation, it is not enough that DNA damage occur. Also necessary are failure of DNA repair and/or an impairment of regulated cell death. Stress and the repression of emotion can negatively affect both of those processes. The findings of the Cervenka investigators and of the British surgeon David Kisson make physiological sense when we consider the first stage of malignant transformation, that of initiation. A two-part article published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal in 1996 reviewed the role of the PNI system in health and disease. In healthy people, noted the authors, neuroimmune mechanisms provide host defense against infection, injury, cancer, and control immune and inflammatory reactions, which preempt disease. Disease, in other words, is not a simple result of some external attack, but develops in a vulnerable host in whom the internal environment has become disordered. Subsequent phases of cancerous change are promotion and progression. Having escaped the normal regulatory mechanisms that should have prevented their survival, the newly malignant cells continue to divide, leading to the formation of a tumor. At this stage, tumor growth can be inhibited or supported by the body's internal environment. The PNI supersystem comes into play. Acting chiefly through hormonal regulation by the HPA axis, it creates a milieu in the body tissues that is either receptive or hostile to the growth and spread of cancer. The chronic psychological status of the individual may play an important role either in facilitating tumor promotion or in dampening or accentuating the impacts of environmental stress. Dr. Mark E. Lippman, head of the Breast Cancer Section, Medicine Branch, National Cancer Institute, Bethesda, Maryland, has written, "The human endocrine system provides one critical mediator of interaction between psyche and tumor. It seems inescapable that psychic factors which can evoke endocrine changes will have effects on actual tumor biology." The effect of hormones on the growth and spread of cancer is twofold. First, many tumors are directly hormone dependent, or they arise in organs intimately involved in hormonal interactions, such as the ovaries or the testes. Hormone-dependent cancer cells bear on their membranes receptors for various hormones capable of promoting cell growth. One example of a hormone-dependent cancer is that of the breast. It is generally understood that many breast cancers are estrogen-dependent, this being the rationale for the use of the estrogen-blocking drug tamoxifen. Less well known is that some breast cancers have receptors for a broad array of other information substances, including androgens, male sex hormones, progestins, prolactin, insulin, vitamin D, and several more, all of them secreted by the HPA axis or regulated by it. Stress is a powerful modulator of hormonal function, as seen in both human experience and animal studies. In one experiment, researchers manipulated the dominance relationships in groups of female monkeys. Established dominance patterns were broken up. Some previously dominant animals were forced into subordination, while subordinate ones were enabled to achieve dominant status. Social subordination caused hormonal dysfunctions of the HPA axis and of the ovaries. Females that were currently dominant secreted less cortisol than those who were currently subordinate. Dominant female monkeys had normal menstruations and higher concentrations of progesterone prior to ovulation. Subordinates ovulated less often and more frequently had impaired menstrual cycles. When the experimental situation was altered so that previously dominant monkeys became subordinate, their reproductive function was almost immediately suppressed, and their cortisol production went up. The reverse was the case in the monkeys previously subordinate but newly made dominant. Cancers of the female gynecological organs, such as the ovaries and the uterus, are also hormone-related. Ovarian malignancy is only the 7th most common cancer in women, but it is the 4th leading cause of cancer deaths. Of all cancers, it carries the highest tumor-to-death ratio. That is, it has the poorest prognosis. In 1999, 2,600 Canadian women were diagnosed with ovarian cancer. In the same year, 1,500 died of it. In the U.S., about 20,000 women are diagnosed annually. Nearly 2/3 of them will succumb to the disease. Although early treatment is highly effective, by the time most cases are diagnosed, the cancer has advanced beyond the ability of current treatment to cure it. As yet, there are no effective screening tests to identify the initial stages of this disease. Ultrasounds and a blood test called CA-125 are useful in monitoring treatment, but neither is reliable as a tool to find the cancer before it causes symptoms or before it spreads beyond its site of origin. Darlene, an insurance broker, was diagnosed during the course of an infertility workup. They did a laparoscopy to look at my ovaries, she says, and that's how they found the cancer. So instead of a child, I ended up with an oophorectomy. Since infertility is one of the known risk indicators for ovarian cancer, hormonal factors are obviously important. Unfortunately, the picture is confusing. Early menses and late menopause increase the risk of developing ovarian cancer, while pregnancies and the birth control pill decrease it. This pattern would suggest that the more women ovulate, the more susceptible they become to the disease. On the other hand, infertility, when no ovulation takes place, also adds to the risk. Evidently, the hormonal influences here are subtle and complicated. What we do know about the hormones of female reproduction is that they are exquisitely sensitive to women's psychological states and to the stresses in their lives. Hormonal function may also be related to certain character traits, as a study at the University of Pittsburgh in 2001 concluded. Researchers at the Pittsburgh School of Medicine compared the psychological characteristics of women with chronically missed periods, amenorrhea, with women whose menstruation was normal. They were particularly interested in a group with functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, FHA, that is, the group of women who had no identifiable disease or condition to account for the lack of normal ovulation. The study found that the women with FHA reported more dysfunctional attitudes, particularly those associated with need for approval. They were more likely to endorse attitudes that are prevalent among persons vulnerable to depression, such as perfectionistic standards and concern about the judgment of others. A major finding of the Pittsburgh researchers was the discovery of subtly but significantly disturbed eating habits in non-menstruating women. Troubled eating patterns are inextricably linked with unresolved childhood issues, as we will see, for example, in the case of the comedienne Gilda Radner, who died of ovarian cancer. The stresses that create the problems with self-nurture are also stresses that predispose to ill health. The authors of the Pittsburgh study write that women with FHA report more concerns about dieting and weight, fear of weight gain, and tendencies to engage in binge eating. Eating patterns are directly connected with emotional issues arising both from childhood and from current stresses. The patterns of how we eat or don't eat, and how much we eat, are strongly related to the levels of stress we experience and to the coping responses we have developed in the face of life's vicissitudes. In turn, dietary habits intimately affect the functioning of the hormones that influence the female reproductive tract. Anorexics, for example, will often stop menstruating. Jerry Lynn Pryor, a Vancouver endocrinologist with a special interest in women's health issues, found that subtle hormonal disruptions can occur even among women who report regular periods and no symptoms. She wrote in the Canadian Journal of Diagnosis, approximately 1/3 of regular asymptomatic menstrual cycles of healthy women will have disturbances of ovulation that, based on biologic principles, could lead to significant health risks. The commonest cause of failed ovulation in Dr. Pryor's study was insufficient stimulation of the ovaries by the hypothalamus and pituitary due to an imbalance or incoordination in the signals sent from the hypothalamus and pituitary gland to the ovarian follicle. These disturbances, wrote Dr. Pryor, are caused by adaptations related to life cycle, changes in weight, psychosocial stresses, excessive exercise, or illness. Malignancies of the hematological blood cell producing system, such as leukemia and lymphoma, are also hormone dependent, being profoundly affected by cortisol produced in the adrenal gland. Adrenal corticoid hormones inhibit the division and spread of leukemia and lymphoma cells. Thus, hematological malignancies may, in part, result when blood and lymph cells escape from normal inhibition owing to a chronically unbalanced HPA system. The available research points to emotional stress as a significant dynamic in the lives of adults with these diseases. At the University of Rochester, a 15-year study of people who developed lymphoma or leukemia reportedly found that these malignancies were apt to occur in a setting of emotional loss or separation, which in turn brought about feelings of anxiety, sadness, anger, or hopelessness.
Alright, what I think I'm going to do now is take the remaining yellow, add a bit of white to it, and hit some highlights on the blanket to give it a little bit of texture, while that madder carmine alizarin brown mixture is still wet. So I'm going to stop it here, pick up with another take in a minute.
With the biopsychosocial
Take
state
two.
of the organism, as with the type of cancer itself. Once a cancer reaches the stage where its cell surfaces display molecules different from the normal body proteins, it ought to be destroyed by immune responses of many different kinds. T cells should attack it with noxious chemicals, antibodies should be formed against it, specialized blood cells should chew it up. Under conditions of chronic stress, the immune system may become either too confused to recognize the mutated cell clones that form the cancer, or too debilitated to mount an effective attack against them. Also implicated in the growth and development of tumors are a large number of locally produced chemicals, some secreted by the cancer cells themselves. Such chemicals include growth factors, inhibitory substances, and messenger molecules of many kinds. A complicated balance among them will tilt the process toward either tumor suppression or tumor growth. Suffice it to say here that this intricate biochemical cascade is profoundly influenced by the PNI system, particularly through hormones and other information substances. Finally, emotional states are of great potential significance in the prevention or encouragement of cancer metastasis, the movement of malignant cells from the original tumor site to other areas of the body. In popular mythology, cancer has to be caught early before it has a chance to spread. The biological reality is quite different. By the time a tumor becomes detectable, spread has in many cases already occurred. A high proportion of early cancers have already thrown off occult metastases by the time the primary tumor is diagnosed, the British oncologist Basil Stoll has pointed out. However, most metastases either die or lie dormant for a long time. Doubling time, the amount of time needed for a tumor mass to double in size, varies from one cancer type to another, and there are great variation within individual cancer types. For a tumor to become clinically noticeable, even on an easily accessible body tissue like the skin or the breast, it has to become about half a gram in size, comprising about 500 million cells. A single cell with a malignant mutation would have to double about 30 times to reach such dimensions. In breast cancer, doubling time has been calculated to range from a few days to 1.5 years, with an average of about 4 months. If a tumor cell were to grow constantly at the last rate, it would take about 8 years to become clinically evident, and some sources suggest an even longer doubling time with a time span of about 15 to 20 years to become clinically evident. In the real life of a tumor, there is probably no steady doubling rate. Rather, there are broad fluctuations in growth rate depending on what is happening in the life of the host. We recall the history of Michelle, whose breast lump, which had been present for 7 years, changed dramatically after a period of acute stress. Since breast cancers have the potential to metastasize by the time they are a little over 0.5 millimeter in diameter, if a tumor is going to metastasize, in general it will already have done so by the time it is clinically detectable. Microscopic spread of malignant cells seems to happen in many cases of breast cancer without ever causing clinical problems. In other cases, the metastatic deposit may lie dormant in distant tissues for years and then unexpectedly declare itself in the form of symptoms. The same dynamic operates with prostate cancer, which is why spread has already occurred in 40% of prostate malignancies by the time the diagnosis is made. In fact, in a striking similarity with prostate cancer, autopsy studies on women indicate that as many as 25 to 30% of all women have microscopic breast malignancies, far in excess of the number ever actually manifested. The issue, therefore, is not simply the prevention of spread, but why and under what conditions in some people already existing dormant deposits convert into clinical cancer. Tumor dormancy is affected by many hormonal and immunological influences, all of them functions of the PNI system, and all of them highly susceptible to life stresses. There are dramatic fluctuations in tumor growth rates from one patient to the next. Also evident is a high degree of inconsistency in the appearance of metastatic disease and of survival times among patients who, clinically, are diagnosed with exactly the same type of cancer at the same stage of severity. For example, there are many cases where incompletely excised breast cancers never recur, or where secondary deposits lie dormant in the host tissues for up to 30 years before finally manifesting. Such individual differences, it would seem, are due not to the autonomous behavior of the malignancy, but to factors in the body's internal environment that inhibit the growth of cancer, or, conversely, encourage it. That internal milieu is profoundly affected by the stressors acting on people's lives, and also by the highly variable ways in which individuals cope with stress. In numerous studies of cancer, the most consistently identified risk factor is the inability to express emotion, particularly the feelings associated with anger. The repression of anger is not an abstract emotional trait that mysteriously leads to disease. It is a major risk factor because it increases physiological stress on the organism. It does not act alone, but in conjunction with other risk factors that are likely to accompany it, such as hopelessness and lack of social support. The person who does not feel or express negative emotion will be isolated even if surrounded by friends, because his real self is not seen. The sense of hopelessness follows from the chronic inability to be true to oneself on the deepest level. And hopelessness leads to helplessness, since nothing one can do is perceived as making any difference. One study dealt with healthy women who had no symptoms, only an abnormal pap smear on a routine physical examination. Without any knowledge of the results of the pap smear, the researchers were able to predict with almost 75% accuracy those individuals who had early cancer, simply by utilizing a questionnaire which differentiated between various emotional states. They found that cancer was most apt to occur in those women with a helplessness-prone personality, or some sense of helpless frustration which could not be resolved in the preceding 6 months. The researchers in Sparenka had also predicted who among their nearly 1,400 subjects would likely develop cancer and die of it, based on the psychological characteristics of rationality, anti-emotionality, repressed anger, and a long-lasting sense of hopelessness. When they checked the death records 10 years later, they found that they had been right in 78% of cases. It seems to us, they commented, that the importance of psychosomatic risk factors is likely to have been grossly underestimated in many studies. The influence of psychological risk factors is poignantly illustrated in the life history of Gilda Radner. Radner's maternal aunt and 2 cousins died of ovarian cancer, and her mother was successfully treated for breast cancer. Gilda faced a genetic risk, but was she absolutely fated to die of ovarian cancer? There is no reason to think so. For most women who develop ovarian cancer, heredity does not figure heavily among the risk factors. For a few, it is highly significant. About 8% of women with ovarian cancer carry one of the genetic mutations known to increase risk. In fact, these are the same BRCA genes implicated in breast cancer. Depending on which strand of DNA is involved, those with the mutation on one gene could have a 63% risk of developing cancer by age 70. Those women whose mutation is in the other gene have a 27% risk of ovarian cancer by age 75. For women without the mutation, but who have a first-degree relative, mother, sister, or daughter, with ovarian cancer, the risk is about 5%. Here again, we see that genes by themselves do not tell the whole story. Even in these high-risk categories, not everyone is ordained to develop cancer. Gilda Radner sparkled with manic energy and a zest for experience, but she carried the psychological burdens of a highly stressful and self-negating life. The eating disorder she suffered from likely affected her hormonal balance. She was also infertile, due probably to the type of hypothalamic pituitary dysfunction discussed earlier in this chapter. The slim star of Saturday Night Live was bulimic. By her own description, she had been an unhappy, fat, and mediocre child. She characterized her childhood as a nightmare. My brother and I ate ourselves into little balloon children, she wrote in her memoir. We looked like no-neck monsters. My parents sent me to summer camp every year, and every year I was scapegoated. In the princess game, there would be controlling girls and pretty girls. The controlling girls would make the pretty girl the princess, and the controlling girls would be the advisors to the princess. The fat girl would be the servant or something, and that would be me. Gilda's relationship with her mother appears to have been intensely negative, and apparently marked by competition for her father's attention. Gilda maintained that her father had been the love of my life. His death of brain cancer when she was 12 was an irreparable loss. All her adult life, Gilda, out of sheer desperation, promiscuously sought male love and acceptance. To a great extent, my life has been controlled by the men I loved, she wrote. She attempted to make herself into whatever woman she thought the man in her life preferred. Gilda found it impossible to speak her emotional truth to her mother, Henrietta, or to say no to her directly. When already a star and a closet bulimic, she would attempt to allay her mother's anxieties about what she ate by concocting detailed fabrications of imaginary meals. Henrietta did not learn about her daughter's bulimia while Gilda was alive. Using comedy, Gilda could control her environment. Comedy filled a crucial childhood need. It was a way of endearing herself to her father and her sole means of reaching her mother, a way of getting to her when nothing worked. She became a natural comic. The price was the obliteration of her own feelings. Gilda was a self-confessed workaholic who, she would write, let stress and pressure run my precious life. On a youthful trip to Paris, she threw herself in front of traffic in a dramatic suicidal gesture that could easily have killed her. At least someone cares about me, she said to the friend who pulled her to safety. Even after her symptoms of ovarian cancer began to cause physical distress, including bowel blockage, Radner was more concerned with satisfying others than with her own needs. She sought and received advice from sundry sources. Her dilemma? Suddenly I began to wonder how to please so many people. Do I take magnesium citrate? What about the coffee enema? Do I do both? Do I do the abdominal massage or the colonic? Do I tell the doctors about each other? East meets west in Gilda's body. Western medicine down my throat, Eastern medicine up my butt. When it seemed she had been successfully treated, Gilda became a poster girl for ovarian cancer, featured on the cover of Life magazine. She was an inspiration to many, but the recovery was short-lived. Still attached to roles she had developed as a child, she berated herself for having let down others by developing terminal illness. I had become a spokeswoman for the wellness community and a symbol of getting well. I had been a model cancer patient, completely active in my own therapy. Now I felt like a living example that didn't work. I'm just a fraud, I thought. Only close to her death did Gilda finally learn that she could not be mother to the world. I couldn't do everything I wanted to do. I couldn't keep calling all the cancer patients I knew, and I couldn't try to help heal all the women with ovarian cancer, and I couldn't read every letter I received because it was ripping me apart. I couldn't cry all those tears for everybody else. I had to take care of myself. It is important to realize that you have to take care of yourself because you can't take care of anybody else until you do. Chapter 8. Something good comes out of this. Ed was diagnosed after his general practitioner found a small nodule during a routine rectal exam. Went for a biopsy, he reports, and they did 6 hits on the prostate. They found an irregularity in 1 hit. Prostate cancer. Since then, I've looked at all the options, and it was all either slash, burn, or poison. I've spoken with a lot of men who have had their prostate removed, and some who have had radiation. It's been pretty lousy for most of them. You haven't had any medical treatment? I asked Ed. I've been to a naturopath, and I'm doing hypnotherapy, and I've been doing a lot of looking at myself and how I've lived my life. Ed's colorful phrase, slash, burn, or poison, refers to the 3 major types of treatment currently offered for prostate cancer: surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Although some patients come through such treatments without harm, others suffer unpleasant consequences such as urinary incontinence and impotence. A review of over 100,000 prostatectomy cases published in 1999 concluded that complications and readmission after prostatectomy are substantially more common than previously recognized. Those risks might be acceptable if the treatments available cured disease or saved lives, but the evidence is ambivalent at best. The loud public campaigns urging men to undergo screening tests for prostate cancer by means of the rectal digital exam or the prostate-specific antigen, PSA, blood tests have no proven scientific basis. I think it's important for people to realize that once we find their prostate cancer, we still have no evidence that treatment works. Timothy Wilt, Associate Professor of Medicine at the Minneapolis Veteran Affairs Medical
Okay, I think that's it for the moment. It's pretty saturated.
Times.
There's not much else I can do with
And that's really the whole crux
right
of the
this
screening
second
issue.
until that sets up.
If treatment doesn't work, why are we
That's a pretty
using
decent
the
foundation
PSA
of
to
color
look for
and
tumors?
texture beginning to develop.
Supporters of
There.
aggressive medical approaches ought to be disheartened by statistics gathered by Dr. Otis Brawley, a medical oncologist and epidemiologist at the U.S. National Cancer Institute. In places where screening is widely practiced, the incidence of diagnosed prostate cancer goes up, and the number of men being treated increases, but the death rate from prostatic malignancy remains unchanged.
All right.
If anything,
Thank you for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Warmth.
Also disturbing are findings published in the Journal of the
Have a good
National
day, Earth.
Cancer Institute that men